Welcome back. So this section is all about writing good Midjourney prompts. We've learned the different parameters, some of the ways we can control the actual image generation, but now we're going to talk about how we write a good prompt and what goes into a good prompt. It's a little bit different than prompting ChatGPT. Other than the obvious difference that we're generating images and not text, you'll find that Midjourney is far, I hesitate to say dumber, but it doesn't understand the English language anywhere near as well as ChatGPT. But you can still get incredible results if you know what to do. By the way, I forgot to mention, all the assets in the slides you see here, like this little robot typing at a computer, all generated via Midjourney. Okay, let's get started. So in this section, we'll talk about writing good prompts, and then we are going to revisit some more advanced prompting tactics and techniques and some other parameters that we can use later on, like image prompts, weighting different parts of a prompt. There's more to Midjourney, but I figured we should start with understanding how to write a good prompt. The first rule that you should always keep in mind is that generally, the longer and more descriptive the prompt, the better. It's not a hard rule. You can get away with super short prompts, but anytime you do something, even if it's just a single word, it will still work, but the output image or images will rely heavily on Midjourney's default styles. Midjourney will pick up the slack and decide what something is supposed to look at. If you don't specify the camera angle, the composition, the mood, the color, the whatever, all the different things that we can talk about in this section. So it's generally better to be descriptive. Now let me just demonstrate this. I'm going to do two imagines. I'll zoom in. Imagine, and let's do something super simple like cuttlefish. This is one of my favorite animals. I'll just do a single word, and I'll be back when that finishes. Okay, it's not quite finished, but it's almost there. You can see some of the detail already. It seems to be relatively realistic looking examples of cuttlefish. And that's great. It's basically the default Midjourney styles being applied. But if I get more specific and more detailed, I could completely change this, even with just a few words. Maybe I'll say cartoon, purple cuttlefish, and let's go with happy. Just 4 words this time, but we'll get a very different result. And this is probably very obvious. I assume, this is not really teaching anything all that remarkable, but I do want to demonstrate that you can get away with just a single word. You can actually even just do an emoji. So while that's going, let's do an imagine prompt with an emoji. How about fire emoji? And okay, you can see we're getting a very different result already. We're only about, a third of the way there. But we're getting purple, happy, cartoon, cuttlefish. And those are just some of the dimensions, the different things we can control. We didn't even talk about in that prompt the angle, the composition, the lighting. It's just color, mood, subject, and style, cartoon. And there we go. It's almost there, and we get a very, very different output. And I think it finished up. There we go. Beautiful, purple, happy, cartoon, cuttlefish. Very different output. And you can see the emoji one is working away. We're getting quite diverse results that all have to do with fire in some way, or fire-ish. Not very specific at all, just a single emoji, but it does work. But generally, when I'm working with Midjourney, I have something in mind. Unless I'm really just exploring and I'm not sure what I want, I usually have an image in my head almost. It can be nice to be surprised by Midjourney, but it's also nice to have it do what you want. And that's where being descriptive comes in. It sounds obvious. It is obvious. The more descriptive, generally, the better. With the caveat of what I'll show you in the next video. Let's finish up the fire. There we go. That's pretty neat, actually. I like this one up top here. This little fire terrarium looking thing. I don't know why it won't load for me. There we go. Yeah, that's neat. Okay, next we'll talk more about prompting. The next thing you have to know about Midjourney is that it kind of sucks at understanding the English language, the relationship between words, and basic grammar. It isn't completely useless in that regard, but compared to something like ChatGPT, where you can provide really long, complex sentences or full paragraphs, even an essay, and it's able to respond well, Midjourney is not at all at that same level. It often struggles to understand the English language like a person would, or even like ChatGPT would. So don't count on it to understand the sentence structure or even the basic relationship between words. And we've actually kind of already seen this when we talked about things like if you write a prompt that says, birthday party without cake or with no cake or don't include cake, it will often just include cake. It doesn't understand the relationship between don't include and cake. And that's another topic we'll revisit when we talk about negative prompting in just a moment. So you don't have to ignore grammar entirely. I wrote ignore grammar. It's more don't rely on it understanding English and grammar and the relationship between words, and don't be surprised if it just doesn't understand what you're asking for. And understand is not really the right term, of course, right? It's just a model here. But if it gives you results that you're not expecting based on your input, sometimes you need to simplify the language. And you'll often see prompts on the showcase on midjourney.com or on Reddit that look something like this. A long series of concepts and descriptors, right? Incredibly powerful anime woman. For whatever reason, people love generating, well, I shouldn't say whatever reason. I think we know the reason. Certain people love generating images of anime women. If you go in the showcase and you sort by top or rising, they tend to be all anime women portraits. But that aside, this is not really a sentence, right? It's just a bunch of descriptors created by these people, certain artists, I guess. Movie poster style, box office hit, masterpiece of storytelling, main character center focus, monsters and mech creatures locked in combat, nuclear explosions. Here's another example. Dramatic photo of a blue viper coiled and ready to strike. Flash, fast shutter, detailed eyes, intricate scales. By Annie Leibovitz. Photorealism, bokeh blur, vivid color. This is not really a sentence. This works well. And here's one more example. Photography by Mark Davis in the style of double exposure, Swiss realism, shiny eyes, monochrome landscapes, strong facial expression, mysterious jungle, photographic montage. I didn't write these prompts. These are just taken from existing showcase images that I thought were cool looking. And they work. They gave us, I can show them in a moment. Or I'll show what happens when I run them at least. We get decent results. But it's not a sentence, really. It doesn't follow traditional English grammar. Another thing that you might have noticed is that there's a lot of commas in those prompts. That's a choice that people make. It's not something that Midjourney necessarily recommends. The docs don't talk about it. The commas don't actually mean anything to the Midjourney bot, at least according to Midjourney in their documentation. There's no official recognized meaning, but they're used to separate out individual concepts and pieces of a prompt, generally to make it easier for us humans to look at the prompt. Instead of just having all of these separated by spaces, which still works, by the way, it's just easier to understand the different components of the prompt when you use commas. Some people use periods or dashes, but commas seem to be the most common by far. Another thing you'll see that we'll cover later on is the double colon, and that has a different meaning. It actually means something. Anyway, let me demonstrate some of these. And the first thing that I'll do is show you an example. When I say that it doesn't really understand the English language very well, here's a very simple prompt. I asked orange tabby cat sitting inside a cardboard box that is perched on a bookshelf. So I want it to be a cat in a box on a bookshelf. Instead, it's just getting cat perched on a bookshelf, basically. I don't see a box, really. There's no cardboard box here. It's just a cat on a bookshelf. When I instead just broke it up into a couple different concepts, and I used commas in this case, but I also just slimmed down the English language. I used fewer prepositions. It's orange tabby cat sitting in cardboard box, comma, on bookshelf. Simpler language. I didn't say perched on a bookshelf. It gave me slightly better results where I'm getting a cat in the box and also a bookshelf. It doesn't happen to be on the bookshelf, but the bookshelf is in the background. Here's a few more examples of the way that a lot of people write prompts. The syntax I already showed you that is basically just a bunch of different concepts and terms separated by commas. So this says, by Akira Toriyama, Arthur Rock, I don't know these artists, fantasy, cute, anthropomorphic frog, knight, kids manga, Chrono Trigger style, cute details, anime, cute fantasy, kawaii, contrasting colors, pretty colors, dramatic lighting. Sometimes people go over the top and kind of repeat themselves, but the point here is that it's not really a description of the exact frog, knight, whatever this is. It doesn't say holding a sword in its hand, standing on stone with a red cape and armor and, green skin and white underbelly and all these different pieces. You can sometimes get away with that, but it often gets tripped up on certain details, and it tends to work better if you give it a bunch of concepts and ideas rather than a paragraph that's true English, with sentence structures. The next rule to keep in mind is that it's always best to put the essentials in your prompt first. So technically, in a prompt, every single word is supposed to have the same amount of weight. They're supposed to mean the same amount to the model. But this is not according to Midjourney, but just according to people's experimentation, including my own. It appears that the earlier words in the prompt have a stronger resulting presence in the images that you get. So if there's something that you really need to have in the image that you can't go without, you should put it early on in the prompt and then add on any other details later. So let me show you an example of that. Here's the little image I used to generate this little robot saying 3, because we're on rule number 3. Take a look at this prompt here. This prompt is rat, woman with pizza, Times Square, sunset, taxis, people, cars, neon signs, billboard. I put the word rat first, and every image has a rat. Rat, 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 rat. That's maybe what I wanted. If that's what I care the most about is the focus on the rat, there's a lot of things that we could do to make it even more specific that we'll learn more about. I could say things like, close-up portrait of rat in Times Square. I'm just listing a bunch of nouns. Rat, woman, Times Square, sunset. But now here's the exact same words in a different order, but rat comes at the very end, and woman with pizza comes first. We don't see rats anywhere, as far as I can tell. Maybe there's a little hidden rat somewhere, but I don't really see rats. Nice images, but no rats, even though rat was in the prompt. So the order can matter. Now, it's really not supposed to. Midjourney doesn't say anything about this on their documentation, but as a rule of thumb, put the important subject of your prompt first or early on in the prompt, especially if you have a bunch of nouns, a bunch of things that go in the prompt. Put the most important ones first. Here's one more example. It's not as prominent. I did rushing river, wildflowers, mountains, sunset, trees, and marmot. Marmot is an animal, a burrowing, rock-dwelling animal. It looks like this. They're all over my yard right now, tearing up my flowers. They're very cute, though, and kind of fat. Now, here's the same prompt, but I put marmot first. And you can see the marmots are definitely more of a focus of each of these images. They're really the focal point. The marmot's still featured here, but, well, this one's actually a grizzly bear. So it's a smaller difference than the rat and the pizza one, but it demonstrates that the order can matter. It doesn't always, and it's not supposed to, but it can. So keep that in mind when you're writing your prompt. Put the important subjects, the things that have to be in your resulting image that you can't live without, put them early on. The next tip that I'll show you is a brand new, very useful command. It's so new that actually Midjourney's own docs don't even cover it at the moment. It's a command called Shorten. And if you search for Shorten on here under the list of commands, it doesn't exist. So what does it do? The Shorten command will analyze a prompt. So we run it by /shorten, and then we provide our prompt. And it won't execute the prompt. It won't make images. It won't run Imagine. But it will analyze the individual pieces, basically the tokens in a prompt, and do two things. Tell us which ones are weighted more importantly than others, which ones can be ignored, and then also it will generate some shortened suggestions. So I'm going to take a very long prompt that someone wrote online that has lots of stuff. Overgrown Magical Forest, Owl, Wolf by James Jean, Yoji Shinkawa, Dan Mumford, Chiara Batista, Emerald Spice Creams, Ornate, Colorful, 8K. It's just a lot of terms. I'm going to pass this into /shorten, and this will bold the important tokens. So pie, overgrown, forest, owl, wolf, this artist name, these other artist names, emerald, creams, black, orange, blue, and then it crosses out certain terms that it's basically telling us are not important. And then it will show us 5 shortened examples ranging from slightly shorter to significantly shorter. But the most important part, in my opinion, is the Show Details button right here. If you click this, this shows us the individual weightings relative to one another of the different pieces, the individual tokens in our prompt. So we can see owl is weighted very heavily. Dan Mumford is. Things like wolf, forest, pie, they're not as significant in this prompt. So I like to do this and take a look, it's new, to understand basically a little insight into the world of the Midjourney model. And if we're getting results that are too owl heavy, well, this shows us owl is the most important token in the entire prompt. So if I run this, we will likely get something very owl-like. Also of note is that the prompts are all significantly shorter than the original, and we see quite a few things that have a weight of basically 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, which is Midjourney's way of telling us those are basically going to be ignored and you don't need them. So let's try running this one here, the shorten prompt. It's still long, but significantly shorter than the original. I'll click submit. I can tweak it if I want to, but I'll click submit. And by the way, these are not going to look anything like the original image. This was done on a different version of Midjourney, but even if it was the same version, right, we probably could try generating variations for centuries and never get this exact result. But as you can see here, the owl portion is pretty present in most of these. We've got owl here for sure, some owl ears, I would say. This definitely has an owl beak. And then Dan Mumford is playing a very important role. So I don't know Dan Mumford's art style, but if we rerun that same prompt without Dan Mumford, we've realized it has way too much of an influence on the end result, even though I don't know Dan Mumford's work at all. We'll wait for this to finish. For some reason, this one is just getting stuck. I'm going to exit out, cancel it. We talked about that in the first section, and then run this shortened version. And we should still see that owl and Dan Mumford and all those other tokens from this chart are still present in this shortened version. Okay, so now here's the one where we removed Dan Mumford. And again, I'm not familiar with his work, so it's hard to say exactly what the difference is. But if we compare to this version here that had Dan Mumford, certainly a bigger range of colors, I would say. And then we can also try shorten on this new prompt that does not include Dan Mumford. Go to show details. And now we have a different breakdown. Owl is still the most important, but then face, then orange. So orange is far more elevated. And that holds true. If we look at these images, they have a lot more orange. Whereas up here, orange was not that, I mean, it still was an important token, but Dan Mumford was way more important. And then orange is all the way down here in the 5th position. So that makes a big difference. And then this is the shortened version where we would click that button to run the shortened version. And you can see that we're still getting very similar results. We're getting, I would say, more consistent results as well, but it doesn't look drastically different from what we were getting here with a much longer prompt. So it doesn't mean that you should always use shorten just to completely shorten all of your prompts, because a lot of those tokens that we have removed will still make a difference. And this is also done, with a single grid compared to another single grid. It's a very poor scientific trial. But what is most useful in my experience in this brand new feature, so I've only played with it for a few days, is the show details button, where you can actually see a breakdown of what the model is paying attention to and what doesn't matter as much. Our next prompting guideline is one we've actually learned a little bit about already, which is to say what you want in the prompt, not what you don't want. It's like what my dad used to always tell me what you want, don't tell me what you don't want. If you write a prompt that uses English, like with no cats or without cats or don't include cats, do not make me an image with cats, your image is likely going to include cats because you're putting the word cats in the prompt. Midjourney, as we've already discussed, is not great at understanding the relationship between words. So instead, use the no parameter that we've already learned. Use it to create a negative prompt, right? So pet shop -- no cats will generate an image usually that will have fewer cats and hopefully no cats than pet shop with no cats. There's another strategy for negative prompting, which is to use weights. We haven't learned about weights yet, but you can assign a negative weight, and that's something we'll cover as well in the next section. So here's a quick example of that. I asked for a nighttime view of a tent in Yosemite Valley, and it gave me some nice images, but then I decided I don't want any stars in my nighttime view. So one option is to just say no stars, which is what I wrote here. Nighttime view of tent in Yosemite Valley, no stars. But I'm still getting stars here and here and here and here. All 4 images have stars. So instead, we do nighttime view of tent in Yosemite Valley, -- no stars. Again, it's not a guarantee, and it can be quite frustrating when you can't get rid of something that's in an image that you want to get rid of. but you can see at least 2 of them have 0 stars. And then these top 2 have far fewer stars than what we had here with, the whole Milky Way. So it does make a difference, but it is not perfect. It is not a cure-all. Another option for removing things from a prompt we'll learn later when we cover weighted prompting. So in general, it's just better to specify what you want. Don't try and say, don't include this, no this, without X. Instead, use the -- no parameter. This next rule here, this next guideline, is to use collective nouns or specific numbers. And this is straight from the documentation. It's like one of the 2 or 3 things that they recommend on the docs. They tell you to avoid non-specific phrases like multiple people or many sheep. Instead, use specific numbers like 3 people or collective nouns, which is the word for things like flock or herd or a murder of crows, murder of ravens, whatever. There's a name for a group of usually animals, although it doesn't have to be animals. But that's the recommendation here, and let me show you the difference that it makes. So let's do imagine. You can see I just generated this little guy here. Let's do an imagine a 90s Polaroid. Is that how you spell Polaroid? Photo of people at a pool party. Okay. And then let's do one that's more specific. Let's say many people, or a group of people. Let's say many people. And then one more finally where we say 4 people. This seems so silly, but again, it's straight from the documentation, and it can make a big difference when you're trying to achieve a specific result. Knowing how many people or how many animals. Oh, it doesn't like that prompt, really. Okay, we'll try that again with something slightly different then. Many people was not allowed, but people at a pool party was allowed. That is interesting. Well, let's see if it allows this one down here. Okay, so this one's running now. 90s Polaroid photo of 4 people at a pool party, which, as you can tell, it's not exactly sticking to. We have a couple of images that do have 4 people. The other 2 have 3 people. But they all have a similar composition where it's a Polaroid photo of a small group of people compared to when I just said people. At a pool party, we've got a group of, 5, a group of 50, a group of 3, and a group of 2. So this all kind of goes back to the initial video about being detailed and specific. And you can't always rely on the model to get everything that you say. I mean, clearly I wrote 4 people and it gave me fewer than 4 people. But these are pretty good Polaroid looking. I mean, these really look like photos, don't they? It's quite convincing. Let's try. I ran it one more time. Same deal. I'm getting 4 people, 3, and 3. But it's still closer, presumably, to the end result that I'm looking for than this here where I'm non-specific. I'm including this because it's specifically called out on the documentation. Use collective nouns, use numbers. But I think it really boils down more to just being specific. And one way of being specific is specifying how many of a certain thing. But there's many other ways to be specific, as we'll see throughout the rest of this section. All right, so next we're going to talk about some of the specific details you may want to include in your prompts. Some of them are pretty obvious, including subject. That's probably the one thing everyone usually includes in their prompt. So I'm not going to designate a specific video to talking about the subject, but I think it goes without saying that you want to have a subject generally in your prompt, even if it's just person, cat, car, or, a 1975 Oldsmobile. I'm not a car guy, but I think there was a 1975 Oldsmobile. Who knows? Not a car person. A fairy slipper orchid, whatever the subject is or subjects, you want to put those in the prompt. And generally, you want to put those earlier in the prompt just so that they get the most attention. Even though everything's supposed to be weighted the same, as we saw earlier, it's not always the case. So put the subject early on. Some of these other things, though, like the environment, the mood, the composition, the lighting, these are things you might not think about day to day. But if you were an artist or a photographer, they're really important parts of just the general craft of being an artist or taking photos. And the same is true of writing Midjourney prompts. So in this video, we're going to talk about the mediums that you can use when writing prompts. So you can do basic things like watercolor, pixel art, lino cut, sketch, photograph, needlepoint, graffiti, oil painting, and they all make a massive difference. And everything I show you on this list can make a massive difference. But medium is one of those, certainly, that you may not even consider all the time, but there's a lot of styles out there beyond just the handful I listed here. And I'll show you some reference guides that illustrate different terms for mediums you may not be familiar with. For example, if you don't know what a lino cut is. So let's try some basic examples. I'm going to use the same prompt and just vary the medium. So I just found a lovely bat in my house. I just moved into a house. It's a northern long-eared bat. Thankfully, there's no rabies where I live. I don't know how long it was in this house and how many nights I slept with it, but I've been bit by a bat in the past, had to get rabies shots. It was horrible. Anyway, it's a northern long-eared bat, and we'll start with just the basic drawing, which is really not very specific as a medium. There's a lot of types of drawing. Let's try, watercolor, and one more. Let's do something entirely different. How about a lino cut? Now, while that's going, let me show you one of the references. There's many references out there, lots of people trying to make useful tools and guides for Midjourney. This is one I'll include a link to, where we get a whole list of different mediums, art mediums. So different types of illustrations. Let's look at pencil and graphite. There's charcoal art, there's colored pencil, there's grease pencil, and there's an example of each type. And then just within the world of ink, we have calligraphy versus ballpoint pen art versus ink, fountain pen art, iron, I don't even know what some of this is, India ink, marker art, whiteboard art. If we look at different types of printed materials, different ways of making prints, you can ask for a 3D print, a laser print, a print. You can do things like ask for a monotype or risograph. So if that's one of those where you may not know what a risograph is, but you kind of recognize this type of art when you see it, and now you have a specific term for it. So sometimes it's just about finding the term that corresponds to the style that you like. Let's look at a few others. You can do things like ask it to make origami or pottery. Just lots of different visual mediums. Okay, so we've got the basic drawing prompt. Those are not bad. We have our lino cut of my long-eared bat. So lino cut is where I think it's linoleum that you cut and sort of create a reverse image on. Then you put ink on it and you print off of that carving. And then here's our watercolor bats. Very simple prompt, right? No other detail, just an animal and then a medium. But it makes a very big difference. Let's just try a few more. Let's do a risograph. Let's try tie-dye. And let's try oil painting. Okay, so 2 of those finished up. Here's the risograph. Those are pretty neat. And where's the other one? Here we are. This is our tie-dye bat. Kind of neat, although if I really wanted it to be tie-dye, I could get more specific and say I want a bat, long-eared bat design tie-dye shirt, if that's what I really wanted. Let's try a few more. There's some really fun ones on here. You'll see a lot of people use movie poster a lot. I don't know why, but people like making movie posters. So we could try a bat movie poster, IKEA guide, pop-up book. I really like the mosaics. So there's a bunch of different types of mosaics. I like this micro mosaic where it's really small pieces put together. So let's try that. Let's try micro mosaic. Why don't we try stained glass while we're here? And then let's try one media that I've never heard of. Interesting. What is this? Pietra dura. Let's try that. I don't even know what that actually is. Is that Italian? And I'll be back when these finish. All right, so here's our micro mosaic built up of all these little tiny fragments of stone and shells and rocks. Pretty neat. Here's stained glass. Nice. And we're still waiting on pietra dura, which it probably means hard rock or hard stone or something. I don't even know if that's Italian, but I think that means stone and that means hard. It's probably a carving. Let's fire off just a handful more. Let's do origami. And then let's do, I guess we'll do movie poster. because that seems to be a very trendy one. And then let's try something that's not at all a physical art form. Everything we've seen so far is like handcrafted. Let's try, how about just vector art? So something you would draw in maybe in Adobe Illustrator, for example. So still, I guess, a medium, but not a physical art medium. It's a digital one. And I end up using some of these keywords a lot. If you look at some of the slides I've made in the past, like this is from Midjourney as vector art. This was 3D model, was the name or the medium that I used. So it's not always about painting or drawing or sculpting or origami. Here is our oil painting finally. Looks good to me. It's got that nice sort of soft light that a lot of oil paintings have. We can get way more specific, right? You can say heavy brush strokes or thick paint or whatever you want. Here's our movie poster. Oh, look at that one. It's like a little Furby. Cute. And we're getting vector art slowly and waiting for origami. Okay, origami finished up. Some of these are pretty neat. Now these are quite complex origami examples. I used to be really into origami, probably not that surprising. There's a guy named Robert Lang who makes origami that looks like this. Really complex stuff. I bought his book and made like one thing and it took me weeks, hundreds and hundreds of folds. Anyway, we could probably do simple origami, child's origami, right? There's many ways of changing the result while still keeping origami. Now this is just a quick overview of a million different, 20 different mediums that we could use, but there's a lot more in the world of design. We touched a little bit on vector art, but in the next video, I'm going to talk more about design styles specifically. So along with considering the actual potential art medium, like watercolor, lino cut, and so on, you can also think about design styles. So things like minimalist, flat design, expressionist, psychedelic, these can make a massive impact. So I won't spend too long on this, but I'll queue up a few examples and show you the result. So let's do an isotype, which is a part of the challenge is honestly finding the right terms for the style that you like. But let's do something different this time. Instead of a bat, how about a motorcycle? And then we'll just do isotype, just like that. Nothing else. And then let's queue up a few more. Let's do a psychedelic. Boy, did I spell that right? Let's hope. I don't think I did. We'll see if we can figure it out. And then also, let's do one more that's a minimalist. And again, I'm only using one of these terms at a time, but of course you can combine as many as you want. You could have a minimalist psychedelic motorcycle. I don't know what that would look like, but I'll be back when these all finish up. All right, the isotype finished up. I think they're pretty neat. Yep, I really like that. So super useful. I think that specific keyword isotype for my type of, design style that I like. You can make little logos, make YouTube thumbnails. It just looks clean. We've got our very psychedelic motorcycles, and then we have the minimalist ones, and I also like how that turns out. And again, you can combine all of this, right? I can do minimalist line drawing or something. So let's just queue up a few more: motorcycle, minimalist, and then I'll say line drawing. Let's also try something completely different. Let's do a collage. So that's more of a medium. The lines between these things don't really matter, right? It's just about including them in the prompt. But you can include a design style like on top of that, maximalist or expressionist. Maximalist, collage, motorcycle. And then let's do one more. Let's do a motorcycle. Let's do it as an oil painting, but design style will be surreal. And I'll be back when that's done. Okay, so those finished up. We've got our line drawing that's minimalist of a motorcycle. Looks pretty good. We have our maximalist collage. Those are also pretty neat. And then we have our surreal oil painting, very, Dali-esque up here. Very surreal. And then I ran a few more while I was waiting. I found this keyword I'd never heard of, suprematism. I don't know, but it's this like blocky, sort of abstract-esque blocks of color style. And that's the interpretation of a motorcycle through that lens. And then I just tried something completely different, an exploded view of a motorcycle. Also very neat, I think. Not so much this one, but this one is pretty neat, seeing all the parts. So again, lots of different options here. There's no way to encompass every design style in a single video. I just want you to think about that when you're writing your prompt. So is there a particular medium, like painting, watercolor, line drawing, tie-dye, whatever? And then also, is there a design style? Is it psychedelic, maximalist, surreal, expressionist, all the different, abstract? And that kind of ties into the next thing we'll talk about, which is a really common way of prompting Midjourney is to actually start with an artist that you like. So that's coming up. The next thing to keep in mind when writing your prompts is the lighting that you want. So this can make a really huge difference, honestly, not just with photorealistic images, but any sort of image, even just a 3D render. The lighting that you choose can drastically influence the end result. I don't know if you've ever tried taking photos. Well, I assume you've tried taking photos on your phone, but with a fancy camera, the camera can make a lot of difference. But what makes things really look good is when you have good lighting. A camera only goes so far, and the same is true of Midjourney. Now, it will add some nice lighting and make things look good by default, but you can control it. You can do things like, say, soft lighting, neon lighting, spotlight, harsh lighting, golden hour lighting. So golden hour is that nice half an hour or so right before sunset when the sun is still up and everything gets kind of golden. But you can also do directional lighting. You can do colored lighting. So let's take a look at some examples. Why don't we do an imagine here? What should our prompt be? How about alien in armchair? And then let's do soft lighting. And then let's do movie lighting. And then let's do one more example. How about golden hour? And I'll head over to the same guide that I showed you earlier. This GitHub page has a reference for lighting techniques, and it kind of goes overboard. A lot of them are very specific. We have things like backlit, right? That's a very distinct style of lighting. Dim lighting, dim, bright, mood lighting, moody lighting, cinematic lighting, accent lighting. But then if we keep going down, we have high key lighting. So this is generally a high contrast form of lighting where you have really bright whites and dark blacks. What else do we have? Uplighting and downlighting. So where the lights basically are located. Let's keep going down. We've got concert lighting, light pollution, but then specific types of light. So flood lighting versus spotlighting. Keep going down. You can add sun rays, sun flares, lens aberrations. There's a million things that you can do. And like I said, some of this goes over the top, like, showing you a Coleman lantern. That's not really that's just a subject, I guess. It's not really influencing the lighting of the image all that much compared to saying, that we want UV lighting or infrared or that we want an X-ray. So let's check up. Have these finished yet? Here's the soft lighting one. Okay, pretty soft lighting. Let's look at the golden hour. Also, golden hour looks good. Let's run this again with this time. Let's do high key lighting. And then back on this GitHub page, we have things around shadows, if you want shadows, if you want ray trace shadows. These are all just examples too, right? None of this is built into Midjourney. These are just different types of lighting that you can think about. Let's try a more specific example. Let's say lit from top left and see if it can figure that out. And then let's do one more. How about neon lighting? So here's our high key lighting. This is that very high contrast form of lighting where you get the dark darks, the bright whites, and you can see that it's showing up here. And we could also tell it to be black and white, right? That's not really the type of lighting, but that'd be a stylistic choice. You can say black and white, high key. Here's the beautiful neon lighting. Looks pretty neat. And did the movie lighting ever finish? Here's movie lighting, and that does in fact look like a movie. You'll also see, though, by putting the word movie in there, it also impacts the alien itself. It's not just the lighting, although this does look very cinematic. The actual alien looks like a movie alien, I guess I would say, compared to some of these earlier examples, it still looks like something from a movie, but it's more stylized here. This looks like something that, is almost more of a horror thing. So just keep that in mind. By putting that word movie in there, we're introducing a lot of other stuff into the world of all the possibilities that Midjourney can pick from. Alien is one thing. Movie plus alien is another thing. It's not necessarily going to pick out movie and alien or movie and lighting and only use movie in that context. It will use all of the words that we put in here. So it might have been better to do studio lighting instead of movie lighting, but we're still getting that example. Okay, so here's lighting from the top left. It's not perfect. I mean, this one is definitely getting lit from the top left. This one is from the top left. This one is lit from the top right. So, you can control some of this, but it's not always perfect, as we already have experienced. And if we go to the community feed, let's just sort by top. I'll zoom in. You'll see that a lot of them incorporate lighting. So, well, not that one. That was a very simple prompt. But this one here, if we look at the prompt, what do we have? Cinematic, soft, studio lighting, backlighting. So just one example. This one I imagine says something about soft or candle lighting or something like that. Let's see. Ethereal candle light. Amazing natural light. And let's see if we can find one more with some lighting. I mean, this one probably will mention something about lighting. Photography lighting, professional lighting. So a lot of people incorporate lighting into their prompts. Not always necessary. If you're trying to do something like this here, probably don't need to specify the lighting as, cinematic or spotlit or something when it's a more highly stylized or something that's non-photographic. But even something like this, you could specify that, it does specify the lighting actually. This little render of a fuzzy, plump, round, confused yellow parakeet, it says soft lighting, studio portrait lighting, volumetric lighting. And I would guess not all three of those are necessary. There's also dramatic lighting and then cinematic, illuminated face. It's a little bit over the top. And why don't we actually put it to the test? I'm going to copy this prompt, and we're not going to get the same image, of course, right? It's not deterministic. We won't get the exact same image. Not to mention this is possibly done in v4, not 5.2. But if we use the new command shorten, and I tell it, here's the original prompt, I'd like you to tell me how much of this is actually necessary. Here's what it says. The important things are macro, soft, fuzzy, blue background, portrait lighting. So yeah, it's crossing out volumetric lighting. Lighting is already repeated a bunch of times. Illuminated, and then many other words, right? Style, ultra, 8K, cinematic. So it shows that it's still important to include some lighting, like soft lighting here, but not necessarily every single mention of lighting in 4 different variations. So let's see what happens. Let's run the original prompt, and then let's use the shortened prompt. And we're not going to get the same results, but let's just see if the lighting part of things still looks similar. I'll be back when that's done. Okay, so those just about finished up. Yep, they're both done. So this is the original long prompt that mentioned like 4 different types of lighting: portrait lighting, illuminated face, dramatic lighting, soft lighting. And again, we're not trying to recreate the original image. It's just not possible. But let's just take a look at what we get. This is probably closest to that original image if we were trying to do that. And yeah, there's a lot of lighting involved, right? It is soft lighting, it's portrait lighting, it's illuminated faces. But then if we look at what we get here, this is the shortened version. So not this part. I don't know why that one just never ran, but it's this one here, where the only mentions of lighting are soft lighting and portrait lighting. Still makes a big difference. It's definitely soft lighting and portrait lighting, and it looks good, right? They're very similar, I would say. We have 3 that are pretty bird-like, and then one little baby chick that's more cartoony and very cute. Same thing up here. Anyway, like any prompt, you probably want to run it a bunch of times and then find one that you like, but this is more just about showing that lighting is important, and also just another chance to play around with the new command, shorten, which is fun, just to figure out what the model itself thinks is important and not important about your prompts. One of the coolest and most useful things to do with Midjourney is copy the style of an existing artist. Midjourney was trained on at least 100 million different images. It's unclear exactly how many, but there's at least publicly they've stated over 100 million images. And a lot of those images are from very famous artists, right? That's just what a lot of images are in the world of art. And that ranges from things like, surrealist painters like Dali, Magritte, Picasso, Escher, but also a lot of smaller artists that you may not even know about. But if you find an image that you like, sometimes what you can do is figure out who made it and then use that. So if it's just some person, that is a friend, it's not going to work very well, that you just find some painting they've done that you like. But if you find somebody who's an online artist, even a modern day current artist, assuming they didn't just, start painting yesterday, but there's a chance the model knows about their style. So this can be really useful. Instead of trying to describe exactly what a Picasso painting looks like, it's pretty hard. I mean, I guess you could say cubist and blocky and warped perspectives and whatever, but it's often easier just to use the name of the artist. And the same goes for photographers. So let's try a few examples. And then I'll show you, there's tons of resources to find all sorts of different artists. You don't have to be an art expert. So let's do an imagine here of I like a scarlet. I've been doing too many animals. Let's do something that's not an animal. How about woman playing violin? And then you could just put the word, let's say Pablo Picasso. But what a lot of people do is in the style of Pablo Picasso, in the style of X. And that tends to work very well. So in the style of Pablo Picasso. Let's do a few of these, just very recognizable artists. Let's do in the style of, Banksy. And let's also do one with Salvador Dali. I've already done Dali earlier. How about, let's do Magritte. Okay, and while that's going, I've hit my limit of 3 concurrent. Let's go take a look at the same GitHub repo called Midjourney Styles and Keywords Reference. It has a very long list of artists. All sorts of different categories, so realism versus graffiti versus romanticism and Renaissance. Let's take a look maybe at expressionism. So tons of different artists, or post-impressionism, right? Well, just Van Gogh apparently. Abstract art, realist art, tons of different artists, a lot I've never heard of. Surrealism, Dali, Picasso, Magritte, Max Ernst, lots of different examples. And when you think about why this is effective or can be effective, when you consider what all goes into an artist's paintings, it's tons of different elements, the way they light it, the actual medium that they use, the style choices that they use. There's so much that goes into it, and you can encapsulate that all with the name of the artist. Now, this only really works if there's a particular style you're really after, some inspiration image, but you can also combine artists too. So you could take, if you like the painting style of Grant Wood, who I think he did American Gothic, but you want something that is combined with Alex Gray's psychedelic paintings, you could probably try feeding it in together. And let's just check in on this. Awesome. So here's our Picasso, woman playing violin in the style of Pablo Picasso, looks good. Here's our Banksy, also looks good. And then here's Rene Magritte. So Magritte is the guy who did the, a bunch of paintings. The This Is Not a Pipe painting, the apple in front of the guy's head painting. And this kind of captures his composition, where he does a lot of things that are centered in the frame. Although I would still say if we were really going after it, we would try and get it to be an oil or at least an acrylic painting, some sort of painted medium. This to me looks like a Magritte-inspired photo or 3D render. Anyway, let's try a few more. So this works with all sorts of artists. Again, it has to have been trained on the artist's work. One of my favorite photographers is named Gregory Crewdson. He does these really crazy, hopefully there's no nudity, these very crazy cinematic photos that he sets up for days with spotlights and with crazy lighting and very hyper-staged sets. So everything that you see in these images has been staged, like it's a scene from a movie. Good documentary on it, by the way. It's really interesting to see how he lights everything. Anyway, I like this style. I don't really know how I would describe it. It's hard. I mean, it's cinematic, but it's also, there's like a sort of mood to all of his works. It's somber or isolating or just moody. If you look at these, right, they're not exactly screaming happy. And it's a kind of similar type of lighting. It's the very deliberate sets. So what I can do is just use Gregory Crewdson as my as part of my prompt. Imagine, whoops, misspelled it. Woman playing violin in the style of Gregory Crewdson. Now, I would probably have more details there. Let's just see what if this is all I give it. Let's see what happens. But often you'll have, very specific things you want. She's going to be on the left side of the image, and there's going to be a spotlight. There's a fireplace in the background, whatever. So while that's going, let's take a look at a few other artists and just queue up some more. So I do like Alex Gray. It's very deliberate, distinctive style. How about some graffiti artists or even Instagram artists? So again, these are not, artists necessarily in museums. Maybe they are. I apologize if they are. But we may be able to try some of these. Like, this is a pretty distinctive style of digital art. Let's try taking this person, Peter Moorbacher, and let's do the same thing. Imagine woman playing violin. Geez, cannot type. In the style of Peter Moorbacher. And let's try one more, maybe a manga artist. Ooh, I like that. Let's try that as our style. So in the style of Junji Ito. I don't know why this Gregory Crewdson one is not going yet. There's an error. Looks like Midjourney's being a little buggy. So while those are going, I'll just return back to the community feed, and you'll see that a lot of these, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them will mention specific artists. Like this one here, art by Brian Kessinger, J. Scott Campbell. I don't know these artists, but I assume those are artist names. Here's another example of these. Jellyfish, coral reef, I'm not sure what it is, but by Aaron Hansen and Donato Giancola and Roger Dean. So again, I assume those are famous, maybe watercolor painters. The point is that a lot of people take advantage of this, of providing specific artist names. Same thing here. Rachel Rushk, Jan Dahim. I'm sorry for butchering the names, but this is a very common tactic when you're trying to achieve a specific result. It is hard to describe an artist's style, but it's very easy to describe their name. Okay, take a look. This is the Gregory Crewdson example. It's still a little bit too 3D rendery. There's more things we could do to steer it in the more photographic direction. But look at the lighting, the composition, the moodiness of the scenes. So I showed you his original images a moment ago. Hopefully you remember. They're very moody, soft lighting, a lot of sort of smoke effects and fog in the air, overcast nighttime, gray skies, very staged sets, moss and greenery, and just overall a somber sort of desolate mood. And that's what we see here. And all that I said was a woman playing violin in the style of Gregory Crewdson. Now, there's a lot of potential issues where people are unhappy about using Midjourney to copy artist styles. That's a whole other can of worms I'm not going to open up, but I think it's really fun to play around with. And this would just be my first iteration. Oh, it wasn't even done yet. Wow. So here is the, in the style of that anime artist, what is it, Junji Ito? It looks very similar to those images that I showed you. Spirally, dense backgrounds. And then this is the digital artist that we found, sort of ethereal. I don't know how to describe it. It's hard, but it looks very similar to that man's work. So very cool stuff and a really useful technique. Now let's end with a few more examples. It looks like this one ran twice. And some of these are certainly more photography, and they all just scream of this artist. I can tell you just because I'm familiar with his work, it's pretty accurate. Now let's try a few more maybe hybrid examples. So instead of copying one artist's style, let's try doing a combination. So one of my favorite artists is Albert Bierstadt. Never said his name out loud actually, but he does these American West paintings that are just completely unrealistic, but very beautiful, crazy lighting, stormy lakes, mountains, wildlife, and they're sort of fantastical. Let's combine his work with maybe let's do something obvious like Picasso. Let's just see what happens. So let's do imagine, and then I'll say landscape. Is there a particular landscape? I don't know, Rocky Mountain landscape, lake. Let's put a moose in there. And then I'll say in the style of Bierstadt and Pablo Picasso. And this will be a very weird hybrid, but I picked Picasso because it's just going to be very obvious, right? We all know what Picasso's work looks like. And then Bierstadt does these, did I already go past it? Yeah, these very oil painty, beautiful, soft lit fantasy landscapes. Let's try one more while that's going. So the artist Kehinde Wiley does a very distinctive style. He painted the, I don't know if it's the national, what you call it, the White House portrait, or if it's in the National Portrait Gallery, but he did the portrait of Obama that was quite famous with the floral background elements. That's a trend, paisley and florals in his photos. Let's try doing a portrait of, a dog or a cat in the style of Kehinde Wiley. Okay, so I ran dog with bow tie in the style of Kehinde Wiley. And I think that's enough examples, but just for fun, let's do one by Alex Gray. Very distinctive psychedelic lines, sort of fractally. I don't even know how to describe his paintings. And by the way, the in the style of Bierstadt, in the style of Picasso, it finished. I'm not terribly enthused. Here's one that was just in the style of Bierstadt. It is more smooth, I guess, and more oil painty, less blocky. Here's the one that I also added in the style of Pablo Picasso. It's a little bit more blocky. We're not getting any cubist elements really, but I guess you could say there's some Picasso in there, although I'm not super enthused with how that turned out. Now, these definitely look like Kehinde Wiley paintings, although they're a little photographic, so of course we could then try running that again. Just one more example. Whoops. Imagine. And I'll say dog with bow tie, maybe oil painting. So add the medium in there. And let's go back to Alex Gray. And what would be a fun one to paint or to imagine here? How about just a parrot flying? And I'm going to say in the style of Alex Gray. I'll be back when these finish up. Okay, here we go. This is the second time that I ran the dog with bow tie in the style of Kehinde Wiley, but I put oil painting as the medium. This was the first time. It looks painting-ish-esque, but still very, very realistic for a painting. And then if we look at these examples, this is much closer to the style of Kehinde Wiley, where he's not going for hyperrealism anyway, or photorealism. He does a lot of, line work there, where the shadows and lighting is kind of exaggerated and almost looks like a lino cut or something, where there's a harsh contrast. I'm not an art critic in any way, but this looks just like his work, and the backgrounds are all spot on. Just by adding that oil painting keyword in there, it really helped us. Finally, here's our Alex Gray parrots, and they look pretty close, to the style of Alex Gray. Probably more colors than he actually uses. If we go back to these references, yeah, there's more that we could do to try and guide it in that direction. We could add psychedelic, we could add a color palette, lighting, a specific medium, but I think that's enough for this video. Fun stuff, very fun, and a really useful technique is to say in the style of X artist. The next tip here is probably also pretty obvious, but it bears at least a short video dedicated to it, which is using color. Color keywords can make a huge difference. And there's a lot of ways to use color in your prompt. You can create a tinted photograph, or you can just ask for a pink cat, or you can ask for blue and orange lighting. So you can use it to influence the actual type and the color of the lighting. So you can do the global illumination, make something pink, the whole photo or the whole piece of art, or you can call out a detail like a pink cat. So to save time, I've pre-run some of these. Here's a simple example to start. In this example, I asked it to give me a man splashing paint, and then I just said 3 colors. And I didn't even specify which 3, it just picked 3. So we have yellow, what is that? Yellow, orange, and blue here. Sort of a red, yellow, and blue there. You can see it's 3 colors. This one's orange, blue, and yellow, I think. But then I could get way more specific or treat it completely differently. Here I said portrait of male lion in the style of Eduardo Cobra, which is Cobra. He's a graffiti artist. And in this case, I just added the keyword pink at the end. So I didn't say only use pink, but it's predominantly pink, right? That's like the main color takeaway from these images. Here's a completely different example. Man sitting on park bench, and then I said orange and blue lighting. So I'm controlling the lighting, the color of the lighting. We get an orange and blue moody scene. Here's another. Same prompt, portrait of male lion in the style of Eduardo Cobra, green. So I didn't say it's a green lion, I just said green. And that does enough to sort of tilt the image to the side of green. Now here I'm using it to specifically say I want an orange colored chameleon. I don't want the whole image to be orange. Here's a blue colored chameleon. The whole image is not blue either. I could say blue tinted image, or something like down here, teal tinted photograph of man holding umbrella for cat. And the whole image is not teal, but it has a teal tint. So using color in combination with the word tint or in combination with lighting can make a big difference if you're doing photographic stuff, or really anything. But also, here's an example where I gave specific colors of paint. Man splashing blue, pink, and purple paint. Here we are, blue, pink, and purple paint. So it's pretty good at picking up on colors and understanding the difference between saying a global color like a pink image or pink tinted lighting versus calling out the paint as pink, or the chameleon as blue, or the chameleon as orange. And I lied, I'll do one more example because I didn't show black and white in sepia. So let's do man sitting on park bench in the rain. I'll also add some just moody as a keyword. And then I can say black and white photograph in this case. And then I'll also do sepia photograph. And you can use those terms without the word photograph, but in this case, I want a photograph as my example. But you could do a sepia watercolor. So these color keywords, yeah, probably pretty self-explanatory. I mean, there's other things, neon, pastel, beiges, subdued. There's many different things you could go with, high contrast colors, but including color can make a big difference. And the model is pretty good at picking out what you mean. So here's the black and white photograph. Definitely black and white and looks like a photograph. And here's the sepia version of the same prompt. Looks like a sepia photograph. So it really influences the end result. I think it goes without saying, you can use color in a lot of ways. Another factor to keep in mind when writing prompts, kind of simple, maybe obvious one as well, is the emotion or mood of both the characters or subjects in the actual image, but also of the overall image itself. Using a word like peaceful to describe, a lake with a cabin is very different than using the word moody or unhappy or grumpy. But then, of course, you can also say you want a happy cat, a grumpy cat, a moody cat. Pretty self-explanatory and simple, but I'll show some quick illustrations of the impact it can have. Okay, so let's work with a subject to start. We've done a lot of animals. How about we try using a flower? So let's go with a orange flower, and I'll just do a regular orange flower. I'm not going to describe anything else about it. And then, of course, I can do happy orange flower and grumpy orange flower. I'll be back when those finish. If we look at the community feed, you'll see words like happy all over the place. Here we have confrontational. Okay, pretty significant difference. Here's just a regular orange flower. I think this is a dahlia. I love dahlias. Then we have our happy orange flower. We have our grumpy orange flower. I like that one quite a bit. And of course, we're relying heavily on the default or built-in styles because I'm not really giving it any description. If it's a cartoon, if it's a 3D render, if it's a drawing, if it's hyper-realistic, I'm simply saying grumpy orange flower. Now let's do something completely different. Instead of the actual subject, let's do something like man in kayak on mountain lake, and then I'll say moody, and then I'll do serene. And what's one more sort of global adjective for the mood. How about angry, which is maybe a little different than moody. So here's our serene lake. Here is the moody scene. Of course, it really changes things quite a bit. That single word, I didn't have to say, overcast, low clouds, harsh light, that sort of thing. Grays, and all the stuff that goes along with moody. So, it's pretty self-explanatory, but this is something that a lot of different guides and tutorials, not to mention the Midjourney docs, specifically call out as having a big impact. Using mood descriptors. Happy, sad, moody, serene, peaceful, all those sort of words can make a big difference both on the individual subjects and on the overall image, the whole composition. Another thing to keep in mind when writing your prompts is the time that the images are set, when things happened in the image. One way of thinking about this is eras, using decades, for example, the 1920s, the 1980s, the 2010s, the 2000s, that sort of thing. But also using the roaring 20s, I guess that's another decade, but maybe Industrial Revolution or, Paleolithic times or whatever you want, some setting as far as time goes. And they could even be time of day, 6 p.m. light, or kids going to school in the morning. Just consider time itself. And also this slide is really terrible looking. I struggled a lot to try and lay it out. But let's take a look at some examples of that. So let's play with decades to start. Let's do group of children walking to school. And I'll have this be in a photograph style. We'll have a separate video talking about creating photographs, or things that look like photographs at least. So group of children walking to school photograph. And then I'm going to start with the decade up top. So I'll say 1940s group of children walking to school. And then let's simply vary the decade to 1980s. And then finally, let's do 2010s. Whoops. Okay, I'll be back when these finish up. Okay, so this is starting to finish up. Here's our 1940s kids walking to school. Again, I didn't specify if it should be color, black and white, sepia. All that I said is 1940s. But one of the reasons that it can be useful to use time and eras or decades as a descriptor here is that it also encapsulates a ton of information. In the same way that an artist, saying in the style of, Grant Wood, describes a lot about the medium, the color choice, the lighting, the decade. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into a single artist that we can encapsulate with a single word or a couple of words. The same is true for periods of time, where it would be harder to describe this without using the actual time in 1940s, describing the outfits, the streets, the way, the quality of the photograph, the graininess, the colors. You could do it, but using the decade helps a lot, or even a specific year. So here's our 80s. That looks like 1980s kids walking to school. And then here's our 2010s, which this one looks good to me. Yeah, I guess these are all, I'm not a fan of the black and white ones. I might try rerunning this one again and just saying, color photograph. I'll try it again with a specific year, because 2010s maybe is a little confusing. We don't use that as often as things like 1980s and 1940s. Let's just go with 2015. Group of children walking to school, and I'll say color photograph this time. Now, what I'll also do is do a couple examples where instead of using a decade, it will still describe time, but using just a specific time of the day, which also makes a very big difference. Let's do a scene, beach, bonfire, illustration, and then let's go with, let's do one that's in the middle of the day or maybe the morning. So I'll say 6 a.m., beach, bonfire, illustration. And then let's try another one that's at midnight. And we should get a pretty big distinction here, just because we're telling it the exact time of day. So decades, eras, any sort of big periods of time. It doesn't have to be a decade. It could be a single year, or it could be a whole century. You could just say Renaissance. You could do any sort of movement in time, but it can make a pretty big difference. Same thing with specifying a particular time of day. So our 6 a.m. one, hopefully we'll get some sunrise. And then our midnight one should be pretty much at night, like pitch black. So here's our 2015's group of kids walking to school. I'm not thrilled with the composition, that they're all walking away from the camera. So, that's something we'll explore next is composition and perspectives. But it does look like a group of kids walking to school in the 2015s. Although it's a very specific, it kind of looks like a colder climate perhaps, or somewhere like in the northeast of the US. So again, we could specify the setting, which is yet another thing we have yet to talk about, backgrounds and settings and locations. Okay, so here's my illustrations. This looks good. Here's our 6 a.m. bonfire. Man, that would be nice with the sun coming up. And then here's our midnight bonfire with the moon in the sky. Looks good to me. So very drastic difference. I think it's all pretty self-explanatory. A lot of this section is just like, here's one after another thing to keep in mind. You don't always have to use them, but these are also just tips a lot of the documentation for Midjourney specifically calls out. So it's worth at least considering for the 2 or 3 minutes of this video.